All right, welcome everyone. So we are doing an impromptu live stream, and today I think we're going to be talking about consciousness, but we could take this conversation wherever you want to go with it. See what we end up talking about.
Yeah, I think we want to avoid moral realism because I think we ended up differing on that a little bit, and I think it was mostly semantic. Anyway, so I was listening to you, Adventures in Supermorian Land, and I tuned in right in the middle, or like about halfway through. And you were saying something, and I said, "Oh my God, you made me so sad right now." And what you were probably saying is something anti-realism or some damn thing. But then later on, you quickly redeemed yourself, and by the end of it, I think it's okay. I think Lance is my father. That's what I at the end of it, we agreed on so much. But it is just such a mind-numbing topic. And I don't know if it's true or not, or if it's just my YouTube view of the universe. But according to J.P. Moreland, or whatever, yeah, is it J.P. Moreland? Yeah, I think it is. J.P. Moreland, dualism is coming back. And it seems like it is, because there's a bunch of recent podcasts and interviews on main channels where a bunch of dualists and panpsychists and whatever are getting on and promoting dualism again. So it seems like it's popping up again, right? Is that just? But then when I talk to,
real quick, I do have people in the chat saying, "Who is my guest?" So would you mind just taking a second just to introduce yourself and situate this, because people have no context for this discussion.
Oh, you don't have the tags up or the names up on your thing. Okay, this is, I am Speed of Sound, Mike Bruzenak, from Answers in Atheism, and that's what No Space is, and I have a channel. And nobody takes us seriously or views us, and Christians are afraid of us because they never show up. Anyway, we do stuff on fighting against creationists, anti-evolution people, and just basically religion in general. I also do a little bit of stuff on psychedelics lately, and spirituality and atheism, and also addiction. Delve into that because I am a recovering addict. So anyway.
Awesome.
Is that good enough?
So thanks for introducing. Yeah, that's great. So I'll put links so people could find your stuff and see where you're at and look up all your stuff. But let's get back into it, because I actually like that we just dove right in. So just to situate things a bit more. So we are seeing this sort of I at least like anecdotally, I'm seeing this sort of resurgence of dualism, and panpsychism in particular has really stepped onto the scene. One person who we've had a discussion, Philip Goff and I. Philip Goff is a really nice guy. I think we get along fine. I had a great time with that conversation. I like Philip Goff. I very much disagree with panpsychism, and at least I could say it's better to have disagreements with people that I think are good people that are doing their best to present what they think is true. And I often don't have that impression about some of the people that I've encountered in the Christian apologetics community and some other communities, where some of them come off to me as having like an agenda that I'm not always convinced that they're sincerely like, I think this is true and I'm open to whatever the truth might be. A lot of people come off as dogmatic. The thing is, though, that is everywhere. You find these dogmatic jerk atheists pushing atheist stuff. Pretty much, it doesn't matter what the position is. There's going to be a contingent of people that are not great representatives for it. So I can at least say that. But yeah, we are seeing this resurgence. And what I will say is, I think that we've seen inklings of this, echoes of this in academic philosophy and the broader public since the 1980s, 1990s. We're seeing these sort of resurgences of all these metaphysically heavy-duty, non-empirical or less empiricist type approaches to all sorts of stuff. Moral realism, which again, I don't want to get too much into that, but I think the same thing there, because non-naturalist realism has really seen a rise in the last 30 years or so. So that should situate us.
Yeah, Chalmers kind of like gave it a big kick, right? He invented the hard problem of consciousness. He stumbled in front of a podium at a conference, and he said that phrase, and everybody was like, "Oh my God." It was like the second coming of Christ, right? When he said the hard problem of consciousness. So we've been hearing about it, and it has been plaguing us forever. Well, I got into this stuff. Because P.Z. Myers and Richard Dawkins went to a movie in Minneapolis at the Mall of America called Ben Stein's movie, what Expelled, right? And that was in 2008, I think. And my son texted me and said that P.Z. Myers is at the Mall of America, and they let Richard Dawkins in, but they threw P.Z. Myers out of the premiere of the movie. And so I got on the Richard Dawkins forum, and I made my first post about consciousness in 2008, I think. And I'd been studying, I'd been studying neuroscience and molecular biology prior to that. But then I got into it, and then I started to develop my whole ideas about consciousness since, 12, 15 years ago, something like that. And I've gone through a lot of changes. I did a lot of neuroscience, and neuroscience pretty much has colored my view of consciousness. And the case is today that I do not have a hard problem of consciousness. I have a good intuitive feel for how physicalism basically creates this thing that I would call my subjective experience. So anyway, that's kind of the background of where I'm coming from. I just started reading a book, me and Scott Duke, a week ago, called The Substance of Consciousness. It's a book on by J.P. Moreland. Now, do you know who that is? J.P. Moreland? Okay.
The name, it rings a bell, but I really don't know who J.P. Moreland is.
Well, he's a religious guy, and he claims that he's proving that the soul has to exist. That in order to have the consciousness we have, you have to have a soul. And that's the problem with dualism, because it's just a short hop from dualism to the soul, and God and all of that stuff. And I find that problematic.
Yeah, for me, I think a lot of what is underwriting these what I see as a kind of regression or backsliding into this metaphysically mysterious stuff, even among secular and atheist philosophers. You see dualism, you see moral realism, you see what I take to be really questionable views about consciousness, and just non-naturalist approaches more generally. Christianity had this massive influence on, if not directly on Western philosophy, although it did, indirectly as well, by just permeating the culture and creating the sense of like a cosmic sense of good and evil, and this cosmic sense of that there's a spiritual realm outside of the physical. And I think those cultural influences have had a residual influence on philosophers who have continued to persist in reading, studying, writing, and in being inducted into a tradition that is so thoroughly saturated in that cultural zeitgeist that I think they struggle to think outside of that zeitgeist. And so it's so natural when you from the time you're from the cradle, thinking in terms of there's this mystical invisible realm outside of our realm.
Right.
I think a lot of these secular philosophers try to sterilize and purify it of its theological overtones and say, no, you really can't have that without all the Christian trappings. You can conceptually have it, but it doesn't mean it's a good idea. I think that a lot of these people, it's a sort of there's this like sort of crypto-theistic influence underwriting a lot of these ostensibly secular and atheistic philosophers, and it's the shadow of Christianity that just won't let go its grip on people's minds. That's what I suspect.
Right. Yeah, and there's now, even when we get into Buddhism, I came up in Buddhism from a teenager, basically secular Buddhism. So I consider myself a secular Buddhist. And the whole point of what I was reading back when I was a teenager was that the Western mind separated body from mind, right? That we had this dichotomy that we believed in. And so a Western way of thinking is to think that, well, I have my body and then there's me, somewhere this soul thing around me. And the idea behind Buddhism is to drop that illusion, to lose that illusion. But then when Buddhism arrives over here, ends up in California, it becomes really spiritual, right? Like you're super spiritual when you're a Buddhist, right? You have, which is exactly the opposite of what Buddhism is supposed to accomplish. That is to integrate you with your body and the world, right? So that you're kind of one thing. But anyway. But I've been through gyrations. Where I am right now is I believe in there's Evan Thompson. What is the name? Francisco Varela and a Mark Johnson and a few other people believe in the embodied mind. That were it not for our being able to move and body, we wouldn't really have mind. And I extended that to something I call enworlded mind. And now when I walk around and I think, like right now, what I consider my mind includes you, way over wherever you are, and whatever I'm seeing and everything around me. So all of this basically is what is going on in my mind. It's not in my brain. It's all out here, right? It's a physical locality. I always considered a locality about 50 feet around me. If you ask where's the mind, that's where it is. And the reality of my subjective experience is not just in my brain. If it were, it would be pretty dark. It'd be a pretty dark and silly thing if it were just neurons firing and nothing else happening, right? What do you think of that?
Yeah, so
what do you think of that crazy?
So there are probably formulations. So there's this, this stuff of like the extended mind hypothesis, and there are ways of construing it where people will sort of bake metaphysical notions into it or read into it rather silly implications. But I also think there's just a clearly mundane sense in which we can push the contents of our minds, so to speak, keep minds in air quotes, because I don't see minds as mind for me is a description of stuff that not just brains, but like people do. And we have a nervous system. That nervous system is responsive to the environment. It's not like everything doesn't just come out from the brain into the world, where this is a system that's constantly receiving sensory feedback and is integrated with our entire nervous system and our entire body to interact with the world in a dynamic and constantly adjusting way. And the thing is, we can offload a great deal of the computational resources of how we think and what we do onto the world around us. That's what writing is. If I write something down and I keep it in a notebook and I have a file, like a drawer full of like files I wrote down, that's memory. That's extended memory. If you see the brain as something computerish, sometimes people will read too much into computer comparisons and they think you're saying a brain is exactly like a desktop computer. I don't think it's exactly like a desktop computer, but there is a trivial sense, at least I take it to be trivial, in which it's an information processing device, and the information processing people do, like Lance, it doesn't have to be only things my neurons do. I could read, like if you're reading a teleprompter, you are externalizing part of your activities and behavior. So there's that. And things could start getting blurry at the edges if we have cybernetics and brain implants and all this stuff. So I don't see any problem with externalizing a portion of our way of thinking about things, as long as we're careful to be clear about what we mean by that. So I think what you're saying could fit very nicely with more functionalist approaches. One note I want to add before I hand it back to you is we did have some people in the chat saying most philosophers are not dualists, and that is true. So the question here is are most philosophers dualists or panpsychists or that sort of thing? The question is, there's sort of two things here. It could be that certain works in philosophy and this popular revival is happening largely in the public, and it's visually, it's coming out with a bang. There's fireworks around panpsychism right now, but you're not really persuading the people publishing and working in academic philosophy to any significant extent. Or it could be that it is. I don't really know, but these ideas at the very least are part of a sort of popular public philosophical culture right now. Anyone can go check the 2020 Phil Paper survey, and you will see that I'm looking at it now. It's 22% are dualists, and you do have 33%.
That's a lot.
Identify as functionalists. So like that to me is like a view closest to what I endorse is actually the most common view on the nature of the mind. And yet you wouldn't get that impression if you look at like the discussions on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, because views similar to my own seem to be the public subject of ridicule and lampooning, which isn't to say panpsychism is either. It seems like there's a lot of people that are kind of like they mock and are kind of nasty about rival views on consciousness. And it's exactly an
Yeah.
area that's so murky that seems unnecessary. I think we could
Yeah.
dial it back a bit.
Yeah. Well, I call them goddamn dualists. So I'm not fond of dualism particularly. I mean, that's the beginning of a big problem. But anyway, 22% is way too high. Way too high. I mean, that is problematic. You know, it all stems from this thing that, you know, I have this thing that I'm feeling these qualia, right? This qualitative experience of being a human being. And when you try to find the neural correlate of consciousness, like from 1980 until 2010, the big hot thing was to find the NCC, or the neural correlate of consciousness. And you got guys like Christoph Koch and Crick and a number of other people that went after it and tried to find it. And there were all these different theories that we came up with. And every one of them, at the end of the day, they didn't seem to quite cut it. They didn't seem to quite explain why would a 40 hertz wave synchronized across your brain make this feeling of being me, right? And then another theory would come along, and another theory, there's a little part of your thalamus. Your thalamus is the size of a walnut. It sits about right here in in the middle of your brain. And there's a little tiny part that's about the size of a pea or less, called the intralaminar nuclei. And if you cut that piece out, you will have a completely brain dead human being, never be conscious again. And so that's a neural correlate of consciousness, right? And then there's another one we'll find, you know, somewhere else and in the brainstem and here and there. And I finally said, well, to hell with this. It must be the entire brain, right? But then even that kind of fails. And then, well, it must be the entire body. And then, well, it must be just the body in the world through time. And that's kind of how I progressed. So I know, so I rail against looking for the neural correlate of consciousness, because the neural correlate of consciousness is the entirety of what we know in neuroscience today. The whole damn thing is what you need in order to figure out why it is that I feel what I feel. Okay.
So,
but now,
yeah, so I'm sympathetic to that. But one thing I would say about that is the neural correlates of what exactly? So you can't say what? X correlates with Y if you can't even be clear about what the heck Y is.
Well, that's the problem, right? Okay. I am conscious. So as soon as I think I am conscious, okay, I'm conscious. This is what I call my red kitty qualia cup. And I've had this for 15 years. So it's always been my red kitty qualia cup. So when I want to be conscious of something red, I look at my red kitty qualia cup, right? And then it's like, as soon as I think I am conscious, okay, then I start thinking about what I'm thinking about. And then I get fooled into thinking that there's something there, that there's some little spark at the center. Like if we took away the red, and we took away the shape, and we took away the little kitty, and we took away the rest of this, right? We took away all of the content of consciousness. It seems like there should be something left, but I think not. I think what we're talking about is something that doesn't really exist. There is no real core thing that would be left if we took away one piece of our conscious content at a time. So what is it that we're talking about? If I'm talking about, you know, the experience of seeing the red kitty qualia cup, well, then we're talking about my primary visual cortex and, you know, all the goings on in between. And we're also talking about the actual cup itself, the shape of it, and the color, the way the light's bouncing off, right? All of that. We got to bring all of that in. And so is that what we're talking about? The fact that I'm an organism and I'm like interacting with the world through about 1 million pieces of information? I mean, why would that not have a quality to it for me? But then you think, well, why would it not be that case for a rock, right? A rock just sitting there, right? And that's where the panpsychists say, oh, well, there's little bits of consciousness and they all add up, right, and accumulate. And that is clearly a failed way to approach the problem. So the thing is, when you think about it over and over again, it just keeps coming back to this, well, there's something I can't quite intuitively explain with physical stuff, and that is what they call the hard problem of consciousness. And, it just may be that you're trying to, that you're wrong. You're wrong about all this shit that you think is going on inside of your mind and what you think you're doing when you introspect. You may be wrong about all of that, because at the end of the day, you have to be using whatever it is that your brain does in order to do this introspection. And if that is, one step away from what is real to begin with, then how are you going? I mean, if, there are people that'll say, oh, well, you can't prove the cup is real, but I can prove that what I'm thinking is real. Well, why would your introspection be any more powerful than your extrospection, right? I mean, why would that be more secure? I think it's far less secure. So
there's actually a certain sense, and I like that term, extrospection. I actually think pretty much it's extrospection all the way down. Like when you're introspecting, you're actually really, in a way, to the extent that there's any propositional content to those quote unquote introspections, you're actually theorizing about this ongoing stream of information you're dealing with anyway. And yet a lot of philosophers want to jump the line epistemically and just say, no, I have direct access to the way things are. I have immediate access. And so they think that experience, that their judgments about the nature of their experiences, they can make those in a way that's unmediated. And I don't buy that. So if someone says it seems there's a patch of white looking stuff over here, or it seems there's a chunk of red stuff over here, that's fine. But what philosophers will then do is say, it's not that I can say that it seems that X. They'll say either it is the case that X, like I have direct access to that fact, or they'll make claims where they're blurring the boundaries between theory and phenomenology, and they bake substantive philosophical positions into the content of the experiences themselves. And then they'll say, look, you really can't question the content of the experience. Well, I'm not questioning the content of your experiences. I'm not telling you that if you say, hey, it seems to me that there's something red over there, that you're wrong about how things seem to you. What I'm saying is that I think that they are projecting theory into their phenomenology, and I'm rejecting the theory, not the phenomenology. And so they're saying, look, this, to me, functionally, they're treating this like, no, it's a bundle deal. If you're denying one, you're denying the other. You can't deny the other, so you can't deny this. It's, it's like imagine if someone said, it seems to me that God exists, and that it's so self-evident to me that if you deny my account of my experience, that my experience is caused by God, you're denying that I'm experiencing things as if there's a God. And I wouldn't be denying that. I'd be denying that a good explanation for what you're experiencing is that God explains it. And so I think philosophers are doing this sort of trick of like sort of embedding their views, embedding all the questionable stuff into the unquestionable stuff, and saying, hey, if you want to reject by unquestionable stuff, if you want to reject by questionable stuff, you would have to reject the unquestionable stuff. You can't do that, so you can't reject either. And I don't accept this bundle defense of the way that they handle their approaches.
When Descartes uttered the "I think, therefore I am" cogito, when he said that, he should have been taken out and shot, because it's still plaguing us, right? As the one thing you can count on, the one thing I can count on, I cannot count on anything inside my mind. For instance, when, like, what I'd like to do is look at the cup and then close my eyes and watch what happens to the sensation of the cup as over the next few seconds and minute, right? And what happens is the cup is kind of there. I can kind of see it, and I can kind of remember red, but it is what I call an adumbration or a caricature or a cartoon of what was there when my eyes were actively, my visual system was actively processing the light. It immediately goes down. Well, that's what we're dealing with. But like when you think about thinking, like if you just thought about some, you're in the shower and you're thinking about some philosophical concept, then stop and think about what you were thinking about and what happened when you were thinking about it, right? So as soon as you do that, you start to feel, number one, that words had a lot to do with it. That the only way that I can capture what I was thinking about is to have a narrative, right? But without the narrative, it seems like there's all these other weird shapes and combinations that I can only remember as much as I can remember the cup when I close my eyes. So it becomes a really weak form of when we say, oh, well, thoughts are immaterial. It's like, what the heck do you mean by thought? Because I mean, we spend all day thinking. We don't spend too much of the day thinking about what thinking is and what's really going on when we're thinking. We're just thinking. So it really, introspection is really a mess. And that is the part that they never talk about. They very quickly say, well, of course I'm conscious. Everybody's conscious. We know what that thing is. And then they go on to their massive attack against physicalism, right? They spend about 1 second talking about what is the thing that we're trying to explain. And then they spend the rest of the book going on and on about how physicalism is obviously wrong, that sort of thing. That's what this book. Book is amazing. Part of the reason
they don't. Oh, okay. Well, I can add a link to that in the description too, and we could certainly discuss that.
Yeah, if you want to really
have to discuss it because I haven't read it.
If you put a link, please put a disclaimer, a trigger warning, or something, because it is like. It is so frustrating. I've been reading it all weekend out at a cabin in Wisconsin, and I'm like, and it's like homomerous K masses, right? We're going to talk about homomerous K masses for 12 pages, okay? And all a homomerous K mass is. Do you happen to know what one is? It's a wonderful thing. No idea. Good. If you have a chunk of gold, okay, it's a homomerous K mass because you can split it into K parts and each part will still be gold. That's all he was saying, right? But he devotes an entire chapter to mereology to explain that physical bodies cannot possibly be a continuum throughout your life. You get replaced, by molecules, you get new ideas, whatever. And then at the end of it, he simply concludes that, well, consciousness is not like that. Therefore, consciousness cannot be your body and your mind. So I'm right. I'm a substance dualist now. That's his whole argument. He spends, and his work is brilliant. I mean, he really is a brilliant philosopher, brilliant mathematician. And they come up with this just a whole bunch of wonderful stuff, which I like. I like that kind of philosophy that really digs in. But then when he makes his conclusions, it's like, wait a minute, you missed a few steps here. You just have not convinced me. Anyway, yeah. So if you put the book, please put a warning, dualist warning. Dualist warning is what we need. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember. So one of the first courses I took when I was a graduate student at Tufts was with Dan Dennett. He taught a course, I think it was called Philosophical Foundations of Cognitive Science. And I remember it had, he had like a bunch of dualists. I think it was something like this. This is my dim, reconstructed, probably partially accurate memory. It was like a PowerPoint slide. I'm pretty sure it was something like a mine cart filled with dualists, like Descartes, clutching onto it. And it was getting shoved off of like a cliff. And he's like, the first thing in this class I want to do is shove dualism off a cliff. We're going to leave it behind and then move on from there. So, clearly there's a humorous element to that. I do remember he had asked if there's any dualists in the class and there were. And he's very friendly with people that disagree with him because that makes the class interesting and engaging. You don't just want a bunch of people that are like, we just uncritically agree with everything that you say. But and that to me, I like that because you could treat the idea with a bit of humor and say, yeah, I really get this idea, and then still treat its proponents respectfully and have a good exchange. Yeah. That's my general approach to this. I think dualism is ridiculous, but I think it's ridiculous for a lot of different reasons than philosophers operating within the contemporary analytic philosophical landscape, because they all want to play by this, well, like this clash of intuitions, right? Like, so well, the reason substance dualism is wrong is because I could better accommodate it with my intuition. Like my intuitions can, and I can appeal to these explanatory virtues rather than those explanatory virtues. But for me, when I look at that whole line of inquiry, that whole dialectic, I look at it from a pragmatic perspective, and I just say, look, what is the point? What are you doing with this? What is this even trying to achieve or accomplish? And I think the answer is pretty much nothing beyond flatter the pretenses, the feelings, the sort of initial sentiments of people that are beginning their philosophical inquiry. I see so much of what's bad about mainstream philosophy is you start with a certain set of beliefs, and then you say, how can I make use of the philosophical resources at my disposal to vindicate what I already think is true? And then, so you say, so much philosophy to me functions as conclusions first, reasons afterwards. And when you do that, you are basically becoming a defense attorney for your views, for what you already think. So you have philosophers will say, look, they don't want to deviate too much in their philosophical views about the nature of reality from what supposedly the common sense view is. Why? Maybe the common sense view is radically mistaken. Common sense views about physics are wrong, about life are wrong. Why would common sense views about the fundamental nature of reality not potentially be catastrophically mistaken or goofy or muddled or confused or incoherent? And so just get revisionary. But philosophers have this aversion to revision. And I think this underwrites the matter of consciousness, is that, you know, like the kind of views I'm favorable towards, the illusionist views, eliminativist views, quietist views, they say, hey, look, we think that there's all sorts of fascinating and interesting stuff going on here when you start doing phenomenology and thinking about what the world seems like. It's just that it's not what it seems like. You're wrong about what it seems like, and we could draw on the resources of the sciences to show that you're wrong about what it seems like. And the philosophical response from the community that's more inclined towards panpsychism and dualism, to me, of course, they wouldn't accept this framing, is, well, how it seems to me is so obvious, self-evident, and clear that if all the science says otherwise, like, too bad. Like
science is wrong.
The science, it must be oil and water because it's slipping off of the truth of these views. And that's not to say that they don't care about the sciences. It's that they want to carve out this special space for their philosophical views that's untouchable to these empirical criticisms. And so what they wouldn't say is the scientific criticisms fail, like we have a legitimate target and you just keep missing it. What they would say is it's of the wrong kind of critique, epistemically speaking, to even touch their views in the first place. Their views are often another realm that can't be touched by the sciences. So then they could just wait for the scientifically minded and empirically minded critiques to come in and then say, yeah, it doesn't matter. That's all irrelevant because our views, we use different methods. We use a prioristic methods. We use armchair methods. This is not empirical stuff to begin with. So it's the MC Hammer approach to philosophy. You can't touch this. That's the way.
Exactly right. At the beginning of this book, that's a big point they make, that it's not an empirical question at all. That it's like, okay, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna rail against physicalism for 500 pages, but we're going to start out by saying that no matter what, physicalism doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they say. One of my there are a few things that I really rankle me, and one of them is everybody, and you'd probably say it too, and a lot of people will come out and say, well, neuroscience doesn't know yet what causes consciousness, right? And that really irritates me because I think we know enough about the brain right now that we know exactly what it is. We know what this thing is. We know enough about it to fill in those details. The problem is that the intuition is out here, and we haven't met that intuitive. We haven't closed that intuitive gap, and that's the problem. So it's a hard problem of intuition. It's not a hard problem of consciousness. Over the last 10 years, I have changed my intuition about my mind to the point where it no longer, where it seems just obvious to me, even though sometime late at night, I'll get into that little loop where I start thinking, yeah, but what is this feel that I have, this feel right at the center, and I'll get it down, and it's like, and then I go back out again and then go back down. And it's just, what does Hofstadter call it? A strange loop, that we have. it's a difficult intuition to keep, but I do have an intuition that serves me well, that has to do with all of the functioning of the brain. And I have a pretty rough idea about what it does, that gives me the feel that I have explained it to myself. And so it really aggravates me when people say neuroscience is just, we don't know enough yet. Yeah, we do. We know a lot. We know a lot about the brain.
So it might aggravate you that I still think there's a lot of questions to answer, and I don't think we know the answers.
Oh, yeah.
Them. But
we haven't given the answers.
What I would say is that, look, we have such a history of these kinds of views popping up where people, and Dennett makes similar comparisons, and other people that take more naturalistic or illusionist or limitativist views on the matter of consciousness. Like, just historically, to me, this situation about consciousness looks so much like theological arguments in the past, like explaining life, like what is the nature of life, as if life were there were an essence to it. And so I think there's a common undercurrent. Yeah. There's
I think they call it entelechy.
Well, I was thinking of like protoplasm or Elaine Vital, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, it turned out that there was no essence to life. Life was better understood as this label we slapped onto a range of different types of phenomena and processes. And when you characterize those processes and phenomena, and it turned out they're all natural phenomenon processes, there wasn't any explanatory residue left over. There was nothing left to account for.
Right.
And that sense of dissatisfaction, for me at least, I was already brought up in a time where that was in the rearview mirror and it had dissolved. I think this could happen with consciousness too. I think it's possible, 100 years from now, for consciousness to feel like life, where people are like, I don't get this persistent sense of mystery.
We want to talk a little bit about reductionism, but I want to back up to something. Dan Dennett was your professor, was your teacher?
Yeah. So Dan Dennett was a professor at Tufts University. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I really hate you right now. Oh my God. Dan Dennett, I like to call him the father or our father or whatever. But yeah, so he was actually, oh my God, I would love to talk to Dennett. That would be in fact, when I started this whole thing with getting active in forums and getting online, he was my target. Talk to Dennett. Never happened, but it would be cool. But anyway, reductionism. Okay, this idea of reducing things to, like, if you look at fire, okay, we can reduce fire to talk about carbon combining with oxygen and creating the bonds and the orbitals and all of that, and it gives off photons and whatever. And everybody says, yeah, okay, that explains it for me. Why does that explain it for you? I mean, have you ever stared at a campfire and watched these flickering, flames, and there's like little brushes coming out, colors, blue, green, red, whatever, all these wild colors. And you'll say, oh, well, it's just we can reduce it all to just carbon combining with oxygen. And I say, bullshit, it's that doesn't quite do it. There's more to it than that. So what I do instead, and how I use science and physicalism, rather than to reduce, I construct. So I call myself a constructivist, not a reductionist. So when the problem right now in evolution, okay, is that we're dealing with a weird thing about information and complexity, and it's slowly starting to come into our view. And we're realizing that this reductive idea of evolution, trimming it down to just natural selection, genes, whatever, is not quite the complete story. The complete story, as Robert Sapolsky did in his lectures about 15 years ago, it has to do with chaos and attractors and just all sorts of unbelievably complex phenomena that is not reductionist. It's not, one of the things that they like to do is call a physicalist a materialist, because back in the 1950s, a materialist was this guy with a white lab coat on and black glasses. And, oh, yes, ma'am, just the facts. And he's just going to give you the bare facts, which are really ugly and gray and not pretty and not qualitative, right? And that's sort of like, that is not what materialism at all. It is at all. If you embrace physicalism and naturalism for all that it is, and you try to get your mind around it, it is far more expansive and qualitative than any spiritual just so story will ever be. But anyway, in science, that's where we're heading right now. In the brain, in AI, and everything else, as we're looking at this complexity building information system, right? And that's what life is. And it's certainly, reduction is certainly not a good name for it. So,
yeah,
now,
I think you raise a good point about the that characterization of, you know, the old school term materialism, and I think it persists with modern physicalism. Is there's an emotional appeal here. There is an underlying characterization of the kinds of views. My views are a little different because they're even more metaphysically sparse than a lot of other views of people that would fall into similar camps as me. But there's this framing of this sort of general naturalist and secular and reductionist, and we can like or dislike the various terms, but that whole genre of views, to characterize them as sterile and bland and unable to give humans the kinds of beautiful things we value, that it's a world that's overly clinical and it's lacking in love. And the people that have this sort of perspective, they're going to give you, if you were to follow them and to agree with them, you're going to end up like, you're not going to want a family. You're not going to want to enjoy a sunset or a rainbow. You're just going to look at the numbers and look at the facts, and you're gonna end up sounding like like a customer service person that's trained to be almost not human in their way of interacting. That you're taking all the light and life out of the world, and it's such a ridiculous characterization because I mean it's false, but. And as you suggest, I actually think it's the opposite of true, because I think the kind of worldview that I have is a much richer world that is very much embedded in a qualitative and a holistic perspective on the world. What I do is I abandon what I take to be a clinging to a superstitious. It's clinging to the lowest common denominator of human thought and desire and feeling, which is to immediately grasp all these traditional and explanations for things that hold out. And there's nothing about my worldview where I'm fundamentally opposed to like spirituality or the richness and of qualitative experience or any of that. And yet I'm always hit with this barrage of implications and insinuations that I'm stripping the world of life, meaning, purpose, and value if I don't endorse all the metaphysical mumbo jumbo of rival views. And I dislike that, because there's something I don't like about how so much of it is by implication and insinuation, and they don't just come out and say it, although sometimes they do.
Right. Yeah. They like you're at a rave with like 100 people, and half the various stages of undress gathered around the pool, and you're all stoned on Molly and vodka and whatever. And the materialist is defined as the cop car showing up, ending the party. Right. They're going to drain the life out of the party, right? And that character is there, and that's why they use the word materialist. And oddly enough, atheists used to have the same connotation back in the 50s and 60s. I'm kind of old, so I kind of remember. And it was just this take the life out of the party sort of thing, and just give us the facts. Like Dragnet, just the facts, ma'am. I don't know if you remember. Dragnet was a series when I was a kid, and a horrible series. But anyway, so putting physicalism in its proper place in our imagination and in our lives is not reductive at all. It is very constructive. I mean, if you look at that fire, right, and you would look at an actual specific instance of a fire, and imagine to yourself how many descriptive reductionist lines of paper you would use in order to explain every single atom and molecule and shape in that fire at every level, from seeing the whole, from being a part of it, from being in just all of this stuff. It's mind-boggling how complex physicalism really is. And I don't understand why people don't get a spiritual feeling about that. like one fire, one tree, one leaf, what is going on in one of these things should give you this immense feeling of, oh my God, the universe is awesome. It's just like, so I go the other way anyway. And now
I wonder how much, like, because I have a similar inclination. I wonder how much a receptivity to these kinds of perspectives is motivated by our emotional reaction to them. Because, like, I never found like natural selection to be this like enervating, soul draining characterization of the world. I found it exciting and interesting and fascinating.
Right.
Like, whoa, but you get this reaction from people that some of them seem to see scientific explanations as like Dawkins calls it, like unweaving the rainbow, that you make something why isn't a description of how rainbows work, like, why doesn't that elevate it and make it awesome? To know how they actually work is way cooler than for it to just be mystery. And it just seems like to me, it seems like a lot of philosophy, I don't know if it's envy or fear or anxiety, but there's this like, I don't want science to take my toys away. And I just find something, I'm going to be honest about it, because I don't have to please anybody if I make critical remarks, but to me, it's kind of embarrassing. Like the state of academic philosophy, so much of it, you have great philosophy and great people working in philosophy. And then you have this embarrassing philosophy to me that looks like, stop trying to, take my toys away. And I want to say, grow up and accept that you're not going to be able to play this game outside the realm of the sciences, and saying we're untouchable over and over is only going to work for so long as these departments dwindle and wither and become increasingly irrelevant to society.
Yeah. My son this weekend called them overeducated toddlers or whatever. On my channel, we call them philosophies. People that come up with a syllogism and think that they're going to solve the metaphysical structure of the universe with a syllogism, like 5 lines. They have a 5-line argument. Your blog did a really good job of taking that stuff apart. The one on Adventures in Super Mario Land. But taking their toys away, that is a really good way to look at it. And are we doing that? No, we're not doing that, because philosophy of language and how we communicate, it's very rich, and it should very much interact with physicality and with this, the beauty of naturalism. It just doesn't have to go beyond it and say, oh, but there's something left out. There's something supernatural. There's a residue. There's something left over. I joined these meetup groups where we talk about the psychedelic experience, right? And these guys are, talking about these incredible things that happen to you when you ingest certain substances. And you get into these like unbelievable worlds inside behind your eyelids and whatever. And they are not satisfied with that being just your mind and your life and your experience, the totality of your life flashing before your eyes. They have to say that, oh no, it's your ancient ancestors and their memories and your ancestral trauma, as they put it. And when they do that, to me, they are the ones taking the life out of the party, because they're replacing it with some strange narrative, some religious narrative. And I don't want to do that. I want to think of myself as a bunch of weird, really cool molecules dancing, for 72 years through life. And I've accumulated in my neurons, in my synapses, I've accumulated bits of that whole 72-year experience. And now I can bring them out and play. That is very spiritual to me. I don't understand why they would want to take the life out of the party by creating a religious or spiritual narrative that, basically anti-physicalist. I consider myself a scientist. I like scientism. I think science can inform everything we do. It can inform it. There will be some residue for philosophers, or lots of it, enough to keep us going for 50 millennia, that, but science pretty much should guide us into that world. And we should not color outside the lines of what can happen naturally. I don't think we got enough to do with science. We don't have to go outside the lines and postulate something that we can't even put our hands on, right?
Yeah,
I've watched you speechless.
I think a lot of philosophers are just drawn to that stuff that you can't put your hands on. And we started this talking about consciousness, and that it looks to me like, I want to say this is the sort of last stand for philosophy, because I don't know what else they have left, but I'm sure I'm wrong about that. And if I don't know, we get these fantastic empirical theories that all converge on and just squeeze the life out of the anti-physicalist. I don't want to say physicalist so much as like non-empirical, like more broadly speaking, approaches to consciousness. If we squeeze the life out of those by just crowding them out with better accounts, I think philosophers are just going to pivot to something new. And the thing is, people have short memories, academically speaking, and they could even just dredge up some old stuff. It wouldn't surprise me if we see a theistic resurgence. I think I think it's going to be very hard to overcome this mystery mongering desire that a contingent of the population has. And I think they're just going to keep dredging things up. Look, you had a point in the early 1900s, like, up until the mid 20th century, where the kinds of views that I'm more favorable towards, I don't outright endorse some like the dogmas of these particular approaches, but you had approaches. You had behaviorism in psychology, you had positivism in philosophy, you had Wittgenstein in ordinary language philosophy. I don't buy into these approaches, but I like the aspirations of these approaches that the one precisely the kinds of views that are framed in this like undesirable way of a lab coat and sterility.
Right.
And maybe there was some fault of their early exponents to present them in a way that did give that impression of ruling out all the qualitative stuff. I could certainly see people framing behaviorism or positivism as these sterile, unappealing approaches to things. But I think those approaches were more powerful than people appreciated. And there is an element like, Wittgenstein and others. I actually think those views can play very nicely with a non-bogus magical approach towards spirituality and like rich, positive, qualitative experiences. Just as you're describing, you don't need the goofy, narratives people come up with to enjoy a psychedelic experience. I don't see any reason why a behaviorist approach, or these days let's leave behaviorism behind, a view like mine, like a functionalist approach. I don't think there's qualia, I don't think there's phenomenal states, I don't think there's there's a legitimate hard problem of consciousness. Okay, so does that bar me from enjoying a psychedelic experience? Does that bar me from enjoying art? Like if I see art and I go, there's no red qualia, so I guess I can't enjoy these brushstrokes, that's ridiculous. Of course I can enjoy it. But you do it, so you do have this attitude like I'm still trying to take something away. It's just a false framing. And I think if you could get people around that false framing, it would make views like mine or like yours a lot more palatable to people. Yeah.
And then a lot more expansive. I mean, if we can just one thing that philosophy does and can do, is make us think a little bit harder, like for evolution, right? When we just had natural selection and population genetics and all of that, we didn't have the whole story yet, right? And the people like what was his name, Jerry Fodor came up with his assault on natural selection and whatever, and made us think a little bit harder. So it is capable of making us work a little harder. But like I say, we don't have to color outside of the lines, because as soon as they color outside of the lines, they haven't explained anything. Like you can say that God did it, God created the universe, right? But you haven't really explained the creation of the universe at all. You've just You've just taken this little narrative and you've deferred it to that. But philosophy can inform us of some things, or a lot of things, and get us on the right track. And the right track today, like I say, is information complexity, neural networks, and network stuff. And the other thing is hierarchies. Okay, there's this thing about top-down causation and bottom-up causation, which is something that we need new mathematics to begin to understand. And philosophers can point their finger at something and say, aha, you got some work to do there. You owe us an explanation, as they like to put it. And we do. And then we go ahead and we start finding it. Like supervenience, emergentism, all of that stuff are all areas that lead to this complex mathematics that we need to tackle and that we need to learn more about. So I would, there's going to be room for that kind of philosophy. What there isn't room for is the kind that says, oh, well, we can explain all of this by positing a soul. What the hell is a soul? It's like, yeah, fine. Well, if you can explain it, tell me what it is.
The thing is, though, like most philosophers, at least those working in like contemporary analytic philosophy, I mean, like the philosophy that's predominant in like the United States and the UK, those philosophers are not going to posit souls. They're going to posit something that sounds, and they'll say, I'm a naturalist. And they'll say, hey, I'm just positing a mind.
Yeah.
But
right.
What to me, it looks like functionally they're smuggling in a lot of those things through the back door, and they're treating it like it's this naturalist. Because, like, look, if you look at the Phil paper survey, most of them are going to say they're naturalists, but their naturalism has all these special entities in it that I would never be okay with, like a way of framing and thinking about the world that to me is still keeping the magic and mystery in there. So. They're still going to do it. So I agree with you about the souls, but they're even going to do it with notions like the mind, because you're going to have a lot of people that would present themselves as, look, I am not a theist. I don't believe in souls, but the mind cannot be accounted for with, type A physicalism. It can't be accounted for in this or that way. And you have people that are like, look, I'm not a theist, but these objections that they're raising to, like, look, I would just say this. I encountered tons and tons of people that they're not religious at all. They don't believe in souls. If you talk about the supernatural, they're like, I don't believe in any of that nonsense.
Yeah.
And then you tell them about a view like Dan Dennett's views of consciousness, and they're like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's not, though. It's not ridiculous. And they're not getting over it. These crypto theistic, this residue in their way of thinking. It's not all theology.
Right.
Some of it, I think, is philosophy's fault too. So you're going to get Plato, and then some of it is going to be just the way human psychology works. So people have these essentialist tendencies, and we think that there's essences to things, and we look for them all over the place. And you strip away all the functional and descriptive details, and then they want to think that there's still an essence left over. And I think that's what's going on with this consciousness stuff. But by the way, there is experimental philosophy research that's trying to locate whether people without training in philosophy are as disposed towards like endorsing the hard problem and thinking about consciousness in the same way as philosophers. And it's not really vindicating the way that philosophers think about these sorts of things.
Really?
So it's not. I do think that
so they're common sense.
Yeah. Philosophers keep imagining that. Philosophers keep imagining that common sense thinking reflects how they think.
Right.
We just start finding with the empirical literature over and over and over, this is just consistently not true. That philosophers frame and structure things in ways where they have all these categories and distinctions and framings that we're not able to pick up on this in a way that people without significant exposure to philosophy actually think. And yet philosophers are perfectly comfortable going around. And here's the other thing. Here's the double standard. Philosophers go around saying, ordinary people think this way, ordinary people think that way. And when you point out, hey, you're making like a psychological claim about people, that's empirical. Where's your empirical evidence?
What's your
lot
evidence?
of them, they get really uncomfortable. Like they reject that it's an empirical claim at all, or they don't want to deal with the empirical evidence, or they don't like it when you present alternative, like empirical evidence that runs contrary to what they're claiming. So why is it that it's okay for them to make claims that amount to empirical claims about people in general, But when scientists say, "Hey, there's empirical implications to our findings that are relevant to your philosophical theories," that's somehow not okay. It's a double standard.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the other guys that I've run into just recently. One of them is Mike Humer. The other one is Michael Levine, which really surprised me. He had a talk with, who is it? Okay, there's that Essentia Foundation. Are you familiar with that? I think it's Essentia. Let me see here. That sounds like a hospital. Oh my God, they're amazing. Let's see if I can find it. Essentia. Okay. Stuart Getz. Okay, Peter Van Inwagen, David Pavano. Let's see, where is the guy? Can I? Okay. That's Essentia. Neurological. And God, I should have been more prepared with this. I thought I would remember their names. I run into a bunch of them recently, and yeah, they're. Oh God, what is his name? Scott. Where's Scott? Scott. We did a show on him. If I go to my channel, maybe I'll find it. But anyway, there's just a pile of them, and I want to get to something else. My idea of ribbons and a little bit of Daniel Dennett. I think if we can, let me see if I can find this for you. Oh, there is my channel, and here's my content. Fortunately, I fill out my descriptions pretty well, and we should be able to actually get an answer. Morning coffee, Stephen Meyer. Oh my goodness, sunflower. Okay, there's Eric Hernandez. He's the one that follows J.P. Moreland, but those guys are Christians, and they've got a religious thing. A thing in a box. The myth. Joshua Rasmussen is one of them. He's a Christian. Okay, and he's one of the dualists. Fundies be kind of silly. Tearful breakups. Oh my God. Is Scott in the chat yet? No, not just humor. Kastrup, Bernardo Kastrup. Thank you, Scott. Scott's my co-host, and he knows everything. Anyway, his name is Bernardo Kastrup, and Bernardo Kastrup is on this site, which is pushing a whole lot of woo lately. Let's see, Bernardo. Are you familiar with him, Bernardo Kastrup?
I'm familiar with the name. I've had a lot of people like send links or recommend videos. I haven't set through a video yet, so I don't know anything about Kastrup or Kastrup's views.
Oh, you're going to need if you're not an alcoholic, to have a drink before you do this. It's absolutely essential that you don't watch him sober. Let's see. Is there a mental? I'm trying to find the name of this YouTube site. There's Caltech, and of course he is all over the place. Reality is made of consciousness is his idea. Everything is mental. Everything is mental. And he posts on, let's see, the Essential Foundation is the name of it. Okay. So we have 10 essential reads with Bernardo Kastrup. And let me go ahead and put a link to one of the first videos in chat. So that people know what I'm talking about. Anyway, these guys, there's a whole group of them out there that are just driving me nuts with this. The universe is made of mentals. All of cosmology can be explained by what we experience as the human mind, which just turns it so inside out. Does it not lack humility to think that the entire universe is made of the stuff that my brain is doing? I mean, it's mind-numbing. Anyway, let's see.
Well, a lot of philosophers would say that I lack humility for saying all of the philosophers are wrong. I mean, this is one of the most common reactions I get about the stances I take on various philosophical issues. Is they'll say, "So you're going to say all the experts don't know what they're talking about, or all the experts are wrong?"
Right.
It's a strange reaction because the one of the common lines I appeal to, and I have a whole series of blog posts. I have a 9-part blog post where I critique this kind of appeal. One of the points that I make is that I'm not so inclined to grant that their expertise is all that well established on these questions in the first place. There's so many areas of inquiry, like engineers and the examples I even use examples like chefs. It's pretty easy for a chef to show they're good at cooking. They make you food. If it tastes good, they're probably not a bad chef. Or they make food for a whole group of people and you see if they like it. Or if someone says they're good at chess, if you know what your ranking is and you play them and they kick your ass 3 times in a row, they're better at chess than you. Done. There's all sorts of ways for people to demonstrate their expertise at a specific thing in real time. How did philosophers develop and when have they demonstrated their expertise? Not at logic or knowing what Kant says or whatever. Philosophers can be experts at so many things. In fact, this is a quick note. I'm constantly critiquing philosophy and expressing this anti-philosophy attitude. And, you're making a point of saying you haven't said first you say you're into scientism and then you say philosophy is a role. I totally agree. In fact, I think philosophy has a big role to play in the sciences and in human inquiry in general. I just think its role, I think it has specific roles. And I think philosophers routinely think it has other roles that I don't think it should be playing, like uncovering the metaphysics of reality. But I think it has roles like being really good at helping us clarify, break down, split things up, make conceptual distinctions. That's super helpful for the sciences. So it's really good at that. It's really good for logic. Logic is super duper valuable, but I see logic's role largely. I mean, logic has other applications and like computer science and stuff like that, but at like all these practical applications that I'm all in favor of. But it has application I think it's something that Dennett said something like one of the good things about like programming is that it makes you honest. Like if you have code, and you can't just put bullshit in there because the code won't run. You're not going to get the output that you're looking for. And so logic is very much like that for human thought. If you can distill your thought into, recognizably valid argumentative structures, you at least have something that stands a chance of being true. Right. Then we're going to have to get into the content. And that's where we have to get qualitative. And it's not just going to be reducible to mathematical rigor. So logic is absurdly valuable at helping us structure our thoughts. But what a lot of philosophers do, and that's what you see that I do in Adventures in Supermorian Land. Philosophers don't use syllogisms as a way of refining and clarifying arguments that otherwise can only be understood holistically, and you have to deconstruct them and understand the qualitative aspects of them. There's it's difficult to really dig into an argument. They will try to shove everything through a syllogism, and then they use it as a argumentative cudgel, right? So they'll pack everything they think into 3 sentences, throw the 3 sentences at you, and say, deal with that, asshole. Like, what's your objection to premise 1 or premise 2? Right. And as soon as you raise an objection, they'll go, but that's not what that means. That's not it. That's not what this means. And actually, there's 17 premises supporting that premise, and you didn't know about those. Ha ha ha. So, or they'll just use it like as I show in the Adventures in Supermorian Land post, is that syllogism will be used to frame things in a way where you imply that anybody that disagrees with you is stupid or evil. And philosophers do so much of this. Yeah. So that is an idiot or a bad person. This is really common in the metaethics arguments, is to frame anti-realists as like bad people. It's weird and ridiculous.
I love your metaphor to clanging swords together as not being a real sword fight, but rather being a show. You clang the swords together, and real sword fights, somebody gets stabbed, right? And the clanging of the swords, and I am so tired. The YouTube community is just fraught with this nothing but shows of on modern day debate of people clanging their swords together, and nothing at the end of the day, and no clarification at all. Now, one of the things that philosophy can do and should be doing is working on this problem of intuition. Like if you have a hard problem of consciousness, or you have a hard problem of, understanding how science explains anything, what you really have is a hard problem of intuition. And a lot of work can be done with, I have an external object, right? And I'm looking at it and I can understand it. And we develop intuitions about external objects very easily. Okay, but then when we go inside of our mind, we lose our shit. We just lose control of that intuitive ability, right? So what is going on there? I mean, if we're going to study consciousness or subjective experience or the qualia or whatever, well, then we've got a lot of work to do between how we explain objects and how we explain something that we're reporting about our private experience, right? There's a lot of work to be done in philosophy on that intuition of, like, I always ask, why do we think we know what this is? I mean, this is a really complicated thing. Look at that. I can do that, right? I mean, why are we so quick to believe that science explains pens in the first place? We shouldn't be quite that quick, right? We want to understand what we're doing when we come up with explanations or reductions or whatever. And there's a lot of work to be done in that, I think. Do you know what I'm talking about? This idea of how we intuitively comprehend the world or apprehend the world around us. We so quickly miss the point, I think, about what we're doing, how we're understanding things. And we got a lot of work to do on that, how we frame things.
There's an enormous amount of work to do. So there is this literature in philosophy on intuitions, and there's a couple funny things about it. Actually, since I brought up Dennett, so here's the thing: I'm not like going around saying I took courses at Dennett. It's awkward because people will sometimes have this reaction of being like, "Whoa," if you do that sort of thing, and I don't like when people will name drop like prominent people as a means of getting like vicarious clout or status by saying like, I know a famous person. Like, imagine if I told you I was like buddies with Ben Affleck or something. Like, it would be like, who cares? Like, it doesn't matter. I'm not that person, and I didn't do what they do. So merely because I was in the same room with a prominent person doesn't amount to much. But when I
still hate you.
Well, fine. But so when I was at Tufts, I got really interested in this question because, I am into experimental philosophy, and experimental philosophy, basically typically a sort of standard characterization is studying the intuitions of the folk or people without significant philosophical training. I don't like the intuitions language. I don't like the folk language. I would say studying the judgments and attitudes about traditionally philosophical topics among people without significant training in philosophy. So like, that's how I would frame it. But so when I was there, I got really interested in this question of what the heck intuitions are and what role they play in philosophy. But you rarely see courses on philosophical methods or on intuitions. And so what I did with I don't know if they want me talking about their role in all of this, but myself and a couple other graduate students, we ended up doing an independent study with Dan Dennett on intuitions and philosophical methodology. Basically, we pitched, hey, here's a topic we really want to get into. And Dennett was like, sure, let's do it. And so we got to meet with him. We chose the papers we wanted to read and go through, and we read through them and we talked about them. Now, at the time, there was a book that had just come out by this guy, Herman Capellan, called Philosophy Without Intuitions. And what Capellan argues is that the current framing of philosophy as being driven by intuitions is a sort of historical illusion. We might have the impression that people have always been using intuitions as evidence in their arguments, but actually that's not really true. Now, I don't quite agree with that argument. But I do think if you go back and you look at some of those classical arguments, it's not so clear that they are as upfront and as dependent on appeals to intuitions as a lot of arguments today, or a lot of the way people frame things today. I do think philosophers use intuitions after a fashion. The problem, and this is where I'm going to be sympathetic to some critiques of the use of intuitions, is that what the heck is an intuition? If you go and you look at the Stanford Encyclopedia entry on an intuition, so what I'm not talking about is like the everyday use of the term intuition, which sometimes has like The Secret vibes or like Spider-Man vibes, like the spider sense. It's not like I got a feeling. It's not that. It's sometimes they'll say it's a belief. It's merely a belief. That's one view of intuition. They're just beliefs. That's just another word for beliefs. Some will say it's a disposition to believe things. Some will say it's beliefs held without inferential justification. Some of them will say there's a certain type of intellectual seeming. So they'll characterize it in phenomenological and content specific terms. Like it has a certain content, it's intellectual, and it has a certain provenance. It's not inferential, and it strikes you. You have to use this kind of metaphorical language. It strikes you as being that way. It's not like my knowledge from some history book where it doesn't strike me that like George Washington was the first president of the United States. I read it in a book and I go, okay, well, that's what it says.
Right.
It doesn't strike me in the way that say, you know, just to prime the intuition, if someone says, hey, would it be wrong for someone to just punch a person in the face for no reason? Well, it strikes me that, yeah, that would be wrong. That doesn't seem like a good thing to do. It just, you kind of have this, like, intuitions are framed as this, like, boom, it jumps out at you kind of thing. But what you'll find is if you go in the literature, there is no consensus on what intuitions are. There's virtually no research on the underlying cognition of intuition. So like a human brain isn't just a single big sponge, one big processing system where it has an input. It's all just general, and then it has an output. It's not just one big algorithm. It's got a bunch of stuff of semi-autonomous systems operating partially distinct from one another. You know, the occipital lobe doesn't do the exact same thing as the parietal lobe does. They process information in different ways. And while the brain, all its parts communicate with one another, it's not like everything isn't perfectly transparent and accessible to everything else. There's walls, there's firewalls, there's opacities between the internal communications of the brain. And so when you're delivering an output, that output isn't you can't just say it's from the brain. It could be one mechanism or another mechanism. Some of those mechanisms may be pretty reliable. Other mechanisms may be horribly unreliable.
Not so.
And so when we're looking at what someone says, what a philosopher is reporting or writing down, which system is that quote unquote intuition and output of? A reliable system or an unreliable system? The answer is we have no idea, because no one's doing work on this to figure out what the heck is going on at a cognitive level. I take it back. Some people are doing work on this, but there's no consensus.
There is some work
very
on
little work on this. And the thing is, philosophers don't talk about it. They don't want to talk about it. This is stuff like I've never seen a course for this. I had to create my own course with some colleagues just to talk about this. So the philosopher here's what's bizarre about this. Of all the disciplines, isn't philosophy supposed to be the most meta, the most self-reflective discipline? And you know, it's supposed to be the discipline where you stop and go, what is it we're even doing here? What is it that we're doing when we're asking, what is it we're doing here? What is it we're doing? Like you have this you know, recursive philosophy is supposed to have this recursive vibe to it, where we reflect so much on how we do things. Where are the courses on philosophical methods? If I am running a program in biology or psychology or whatever, there's going to be tons and tons of method, like research methods, statistics. You're going to have to take courses, not just to do psychology, but to know how to do psychology. And I have never even seen a course on how to do philosophy. You get your logic courses, but how often are ethicists actually using formal logic? Not that often. It's a tiny, tiny portion of what some people do. Maybe it's a large portion of what some people do. But it's not like logic exhausts the methods of philosophy. There's all this stuff about intuitions. So philosophers are using all these other resources and tools, reflective equilibrium and conceptual analysis and all these other tools and resources. How do they work? Do they work well? Who showed that they work? How do we know how they work? What are the different views about how they work? The answer is, I don't know. Who cares? We don't want to talk about it. So philosophers have done like to say that they've done a terrible job figuring out what their methods are and whether they work and how they work would be an understatement. They're not really doing the work at all. Like this is like the closet where all the machinery is working, and they don't want to open it up. And I think they don't want to open it up because they're not going to like what's in there.
Well, to make it simple, like your brain, your cortex, every time a certain set of neurons fire, right, they project forward to a set of neurons that should fire next. Like if I'm watching my hand move across the screen, okay, the neurons in my visual system are predicting what's going to happen next. And if that prediction matches carefully what does indeed happen, then I get sort of a shot from my limbic system that says, oh, yeah, that makes sense, right? But if, like, all of a sudden this turns into Mickey Mouse while I'm moving it across the screen, I'm going to get, like, this brain slap, like, whack, you know, because the system's going to fire, and I'm going to get a shot of adrenaline, and something's wrong. Like, have you ever walked into a room of people, and all of a sudden there was something there that just totally knocked you off your game, right? Like there was somebody there, ex-wife, or something that just totally shocked you, or there was somebody brought a dancing gorilla to the party, right? And I was like, what the hell? So you get that brain slap, right? and that is the feel that you get when those projected or predicted neurons don't fire. Intuition kind of works like that. It's sort of an emotional system, but what it is not is a random guess or a feel, just the feel. It's based on all that all that your brain is set up to predict. So it's based on your best guess at what the system is going to look like, right? And your best guess at this time. And that is something that you couldn't possibly describe. And when you say you don't have access to it, what that means is that you don't have descriptions of all the little atoms that go into the intuition. If you took your time, you could, review your life and your thought and whatever, and you could come up with lots of reasons why your intuition is this way and not this way. But so anyway, what intuition is what brains have to do. We are, it's made of meat, okay, and it can only do so much. And so intuition is like something that's absolutely necessary to live. And it's like, and that's just how brains work. Brains work intuitively. We make a good guess when we're forming a sentence. That sentence is basically being formed from all that we knew before about language, and it slowly starts to lock into place as we talk. So we're like 3 words ahead somewhere in our brain, and that's all intuition. So, and we do know a bit about how that works, but you're right, as far as just sitting down and putting people in doing CT scans and PET scans on people that are intuiting. I don't know. There's probably somebody researching this, but we certainly should be looking into it carefully. But
there are people that have done this, and they've done it with philosophical stuff. So there's even been stuff on metaethics. There's like fMRI of metaethics stuff. But the approach you're taking to intuition is, to me, a much better approach, which basically says, how does actual human cognition work? And then
how does it actually
characterize
work?
intuitions in terms of the actual functional processes that brains employ. But philosophers are not doing that. So a lot of them would reject your characterization in that's characterized in like cognitive scientific terms. They would reject that and say, no, that's way too sciencey. Intuitions are these sui generis intellectual states that don't really play nicely with attempts to ratchet them into a scientific framework. And so what's really weird about it is that philosophers will often, the very philosophers that rely so much like epistemically on like, these are the resources and tools that they use, like intuitions and whatever it is they're talking about. The ones that are averse to psychologizing all of this, well, what the heck would an intuition be other than some type of psychological state? I mean, that isn't to exhaust what it is, because that's not telling you everything about its epistemic capacities. But it you're clearly everything you're doing as a philosopher is interfaced, like your interface is human thought, and it's mediated by your mind. And so wouldn't it make sense to know how that thing works? And the answer appears
at least
no, we don't need to. We don't need to know how it works.
Yeah, you read that in your, you wrote that in your blog. It's like, the philosophers are using their brain to do this stuff. Aren't they at all interested in how that damn thing works? I mean, like, what? That's got to inform us to understand how it works. Yeah, which just, it's mind numbing to think. It's like a good example of an intuition. You hold up an object and you intuit that it has another side, right? And that's something we do a million times a day, or 10,000 times a day. And that is just a quick intuition. And I mean, that's, are you familiar with, oh my God, the Society of the Mind? What is his name? Why do I always forget his name? He is so important to me. The Society of Mind. The Society of Mind.
It's not ringing a bell.
This guy.
While you look him up, I want to give a shout out to
Marvin Minsky.
Okay, 1 second. I just wanted to give a shout out before it gets too far in the past. So a friend and colleague, we've collaborated on work in the past, Tyler Milhouse, says, hey, Lance, good conversation. Also, the point about programming is really true. I'm trying to recruit more philosophy people into my AI course. So Tyler is absolutely awesome. So go check out Tyler's work. But Tyler does philosophy of computer science and does a lot of stuff with programming. And I think Tyler's referencing my reference to Dennett. like programming keeps people honest. I think learning like programming would be useful for philosophers to get them to think in a sort of regimented way, where you kind of have to see the output of what you're arguing for work. So yeah, just wanted to mention that before it fell too far behind
Okay,
us.
what was his name?
Someone else says Tyler Milhouse is cool, so I agree. Tyler Milhouse.
Okay, so it's Tyler Milhouse. Okay, I professionally I'm a C, Ruby, C++, Python programmer for about 40 years. So I've done a lot of programming, and now my son is very much into AI research, mostly for our company. And he's been fighting with people on forums about AI, and the ethical questions for AI are really coming due in the last year or two with ChatGPT. It's unbelievable. And questions about, is it ever going to be conscious? And, what there are going to be ethical considerations about unplugging these things and erasing the disk that we are going to have to deal with within the decade. I think within the decade. And we think it's like 100 years in the future. No, we're rapidly approaching a real strange time.
Yeah, with the advent of GPT, everyone's like the world is abuzz about this now, and all the timetables have moved much closer. Before you had this widespread of people saying soon, far. Now people are collapsing on.
No.
The question is, it's soon. The question is how soon, and it's imminent. It's a scary time to be alive. It would be nice if it was all sunshine and rainbows and optimism that we're going to have a technotopia or whatever. But we're going to see. There's going to be. It's going to be a bumpy ride if we get through it at all. So I'm going to be talking about that more on my channel too, just because it's too critical of a topic to not discuss.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of directions we could go with consciousness. I've been dying to have somebody that's skilled, like I think you are, to bounce some of my ideas off. And basically, that's kind of why I started bugging you 2 weeks ago to talk to me, because I hate being in a vacuum, that sort of thing. But my ideas, I think, spring off of a lot from Dan Dennett. I really like Dennett, and I like his salty wit and the way he takes things apart. But he gave me some of the key ideas I need, like in Consciousness Explained, or as everybody likes to call it, Consciousness Explained Away. He talks about this thing about how when, like, if you drop something on your foot and you're looking at it, when it hits your toe, you will feel the pain as soon as it hits your toe. But that's not what's happening in your brain. It takes a long time for that signal to get there. So he somewhere in his book, he has this diagram about how the physical events relate to mental events, and they crisscross. And the thing I talk about is this brush of consciousness. Like, our consciousness is not something that happens in physical instantaneous time. There is nothing there. You would be dead if you were stuck with just this one little nano of time, right? What we do is we accumulate it with a broad brush across time, and it's about 200 milliseconds long, as it turns out, from neuroscience. 200 milliseconds to a second, and that's what we're experiencing. We're experiencing that big swath of a lot of neurons doing a lot of things, your body and input doing a lot of things over that period of time. And that's the key point to start. And when you take that little swath of time, when you start to fill in all of what is going on, you end up with a really good description of what a qualia is. Okay. It's really interesting when you see something red. Okay, there's the visual image that persists across time. So as long as you're looking at it, you've still got basically input coming in, and underneath all that, you'll have these little slopes that pop up where you'll start to, like, oh, red, stop sign, stoplight, police car, blood. You have all these emotional things that will come in. Then you have the word red that comes in, and all of these things pop up over time. And we abbreviate that whole swath of time into one qualia, one sense of feeling of the color red. So a lot of people, when they see the color red, they will be responding emotionally to some art that they saw or some sunsets that they felt 5 years ago. And all of that comes into this qualitative experience of being a human being. And that's why we are such cool things, because we take this brush of time and this large brush of our entire life and existence, and we bring it into our present in a remarkable way. And that is it. It's an actual very wonderful way to live. If you walk in the forest and you have a good sense of your entire life, the depth of your entire life and history, bring it pulling forward into the present, right? Then you get more to what it is to be a human being. And then you understand why people are saying, oh my God, this qualia, it is such a, such a mysterious, ineffable thing, right? Well, I like the F quality. I'm not satisfied with ineffable. I like the F it. I've got let's see if I can, I've got this idea, and I'll just briefly talk about it, but it's basically, people have called it ribbons and bows, right? You've got your physicality down here. This is your physical timeline. And physical things happen in instants, right? So there's one instant after another, right? And then up here, you've got your subjective ribbon, right? And your subjective ribbon will take 200 milliseconds to a second of that time and condense it into one qualitative experience, right? And you're moving along. And then you have, this is your body and world down here, this timeline down here that shows you what's going on in the body and the world. And all of these things basically are projecting up into the subjective experience. And this is something that we can study. I mean, we can take a swath of subjective experience if we could test a person over and over again for one experience, and we can watch what's actually going on in the brain down here in all the different parts. And we can make some sort of a correlation. We can start to understand what it is to see my red kitty qualia cup. I mean, they could put me in a machine and test me over and over again with this red cup and come up with a whole lot of information about what's going on. And then, the other thing is that, words will pop in and concepts and all these things in this swath of time. And now when you introspect, like, okay, I just saw my red kitty qualia cup right here, right? And now I'm going to introspect what I saw. Well, you're moving forward in time. You cannot introspect in the moment. So you don't even know for sure if you were conscious 3 seconds ago, 5 minutes ago. You don't have any idea what that subjective experience was when you introspect. So when you introspect, all you're doing is moving forward in this timeline. You're not really capturing what's going on because that's already happened to your brain. And those are some of the ideas that I would like to expand on and explore. They always say physicalists owe us an explanation for consciousness. Well, let's get busy and give them one. Okay, because we have a lot of information about what's going on down here in the brain, and we have a lot of information about how our brains seem to be this like swath of time rather than an instantaneous time, right? And we can start to detail a little bit about what's going on, and then I think the intuition that it's all physical will become more clear. And that's sort of the direction that I want to take in these discussions. So anyway.
Yeah, I do wonder whether people are already doing work like that. I mean, it's one thing I suspect is that the details of consciousness, I suspect scientists are just busy working them out. And eventually we're just going to have enough raw data and resources where once we really dig down and apply it to the philosophical issues. So basically, I see all these scientific approaches to consciousness, and I worry that there's not sufficient crosstalk between people that are sympathetic to views like Dennett's, which looks to me like it's kind of inspiring this approach here. and like the sciences. I'm sure there's people working on this. My guess is that people are just working on this. They're gonna solve these problems, and philosophers will have to either downplay, like change their minds and go, okay, I guess they resolved it, like, convert, or pivot to new problems, because basically I think you're going to have these philosophers doing this dance of evasion to not get pinned down by like physical or functional types of explanations, basically explanations that don't, when I say physical, I don't mean that they have to have some like heavy duty metaphysics behind it where you're characterizing what conceptually and fundamentally distinguishes physical from the non-physical. Just descriptions that are amenable to scientific inquiry. I think that is what people don't want. These like descriptive functional approaches where you could say, look, I'm actually using the tools and resources available to us to actually make predictions and models that can account for things in a way that's not just mystery mongering and slapping labels on intuitions and saying we're done. I'm not going to be the person to do that, though. I haven't taken courses on this topic or read much on this topic in like a decade. I went and did a psychology degree, but I went a very different direction with what I ended up doing.
One thing I want to point out before I take my diagram down is like these physical events down here, right? These are sequential physical events that we can measure empirically and whatever. So when they end up here, okay, they're not in the same order that they were basically. So that's the important thing to understand about our subjective feel of the universe, is that order is not there. We don't know exactly what's happening in that 200 millisecond period down here by our subjective experience. And as soon as you understand that, you've got a whole lot of thinking to do about what is this subjective qualia that I feel up here. And the Mayanist mind said that would still beg the question on physicalism. Is he referring to me? Because that's an interesting thing. In Moreland's book, he uses beg the question. I think Scott found him like 47 times or something, or no, Scott checked out, I think, it seems that, my intuition. I think he used the word it seems like 60 times. He used begging the question 47 times. And then he used it in a number of other ways that we haven't counted yet. And so what the hell is this begging that? I mean, if you are asking for a physical explanation of consciousness, how in the hell am I going to do that without talking about neuroscience and physicality, right? I mean, I'm not begging the question when you are begging me to explain it with physicalism. If the question is, can we explain it with physicalism? I'm afraid I'm going to have to use physicalism to explain it to you, right? Can you explain? What am I missing here, Lance? What am I missing?
I'm not sure what the Mahayanist mind, what exactly their concern is.
Well, for one thing, it's a Mahayanist mind. That's a problem right there.
Well, what I found, because Mahayanist mind has been in my streams pretty actively the past several, seems like we agree on a lot. But it's really going to depend on how you're characterizing physicalism. So,
right.
Yeah. I'm a pragmatist, and so I'm going to take like physics and the sciences more broadly to be ridiculously useful tools for getting things done, making predictions, solving problems, providing us with useful explanatory models of the world. What I'm not going to do is do the same thing that I think substance dualists do, panpsychists, idealists, is to say, and by the way, everything is composed of physical stuff, because that's already doing exactly what I think philosophers shouldn't be doing, which is baking too much metaphysics into their accounts of things.
Everything or all. Yeah. Like I think I came up back on my forum days, I came up with the idea of propositional physicalism. And what propositional physicalism does not do is say everything, all, whatever. Propositional physicalism just deals with what we now know. So it's more of a floating bit of knowledge in the middle of a bed of we don't know, right? So we're not going to make a metaphysical ontological claim that everything about the mind is physical, but we're going to do our best to use what we do know already to explain the mind. There's a big difference.
So
in doing
I'm on
that.
board with the provisional aspect, and the issue that I take with endorsing. Look, because you might be perfectly comfortable saying you're a physicalist, but when analytic philosophers say that they're physicalists, they are going to be endorsing a richer ontology than I'm comfortable with, and that I think you would be uncomfortable with if you knew how they were using the term. That's why you just use the term qualia. But look, if we're just clear, by qualia, we just mean the ineffable intrinsics, immediately apprehensible, private, incommunicable, outside the bounds of science type property. I don't think you would endorse qualia in that respect. You might want to have some acceptable usage of it. For me, there are the sort of conventional usages of physicalism within contemporary analytic philosophy. I'm going to say, whoa. I'm okay with physicalism in air quotes as long as you're clear about exactly what we're doing with it, which is that, what I would say is contemporary physics provides a really useful provisional model for making predictions and explaining things. And it tells us about what the world is like. Does it tell us what the fundamental nature of the world is? No, because I don't think that there is a fundamental nature of the world for it to be any particular way. I think we've got the surfaces, but we don't have the essences because there are no essences. And so if someone construes physics as the essence of the universe is physical stuff, I'm not on board with that. If someone says we can explain the world using physics, or at least a large portion of the world using physics, double thumbs up. I'm totally on board with that. So if that's what you mean by physicalism, I'm okay with it. If you mean the other one, I'm not. And maybe that's underwriting some of Mahayana's mind's worries, is that since you're using this term physicalism, you may be implying, without intending to, I don't know, a bunch of metaphysical stuff that you might not really be so committed to. And that I could just say, I am not.
Propositional physicalism, I propose that I can explain all of these things with the physical. Basically, that's a proposition. I'm not saying that there's nothing else out there. I like, for instance, what came before the Big Bang, which is a ridiculous question because time itself started then, is a metaphysical consideration. I think physics is very much on the edge of metaphysics right now, because they're stuck with trying to find a different kind of geometry or a different kind of mathematics to explain our 4D, space-time world, what it is outside and around or before and after. And the words outside, around, and before and after do not apply at all. I mean, there's something else entirely different going on. If somebody says what happened before the Big Bang, they're asking what's north of the North Pole.
Well, maybe so, but I think I'm trying to get at the root of the worry here with when you're getting pushback from people that have concerns about what you're saying. And it's not about
what is the worry?
So the worry, I suspect, is something like if you were to say everything fundamentally, its essence is that it is a physical thing. It is physical by its nature. And that is making a further ontological claim beyond just saying, hey, physics and the sciences more broadly can describe the world at the fundamental and I guess you could say the sort of constructed or abstract level, respectively. That's how I view the sciences. The sciences are useful descriptions. And insofar as I would have allegiances with physicalist type approaches, it's only in that descriptive or practical sense. It's not in in viewing the world as essentially physical. Because I don't believe in this external essence to the world. I don't think the world is made of any essence. So I don't think the world is made of mind, and I don't think it's made of matter, as though it's made of things. My whole problem is with the idea of essences in the first place. I don't think there is an essence outside of the constructions we have about the world around us. And that's true of physicalism, like the ontologically committed characterizations of physicalism, just as it would be of idealism and of substance dualism. I mean, my problem with substance dualism isn't that it says there's mind and there's matter, and I think it's stupid to say the universe is essentially two things. I think the problem is saying that the universe is essentially anything.
Anything, right? Yeah, which I'm trying to get my mind around that. I'm thinking, I do very much think that everything is physical. I think if you ask me when I'm which I shouldn't have
That's
said
where we may have some
aloud,
disagreements.
but I do. Okay, but what do I mean by everything is physical? Because obviously it can't be matter, it can't be particles, because there are fields, there are forces, there's space and time, and there's also this other very interesting thing that when you take three physical things, right, and arrange them like that, well, you could take three physical things and arrange them like that. Okay, now there is something overall about these two different things that is different. And then if I take three physical things and I arrange them like this, right, there's something overall that is similar between these things, right? So we've created another kind of thing, a relational thing, just using space-time coordinates. In fact, this is just two dimensions, right? I haven't gone any further than that. And we end up with this complexity of how we arrange things. And I think that all of the wonders of the universe are involved in just that. If we look at the universe as what it is right now to us on this planet in this particular period of time. Now, if we go back to the beginning, before the Big Bang, so to speak, and I hate to use that phrase, then we're dealing with something even stranger yet, but it's all still physical. Because I think I have a more expansive idea of what physical is than some philosophers that would complain about physicalism. And, you know, as far as essence, I don't even know what that means, because when we get down to the level of particles and quantum fields, basically, we can't even get our minds around what a particle is, let alone say that there's something essential, that there's something at the bottom that everything is made of. So I wouldn't use that kind of talk, I guess. I don't know. Is that clear? But
physicalists might not want to use that kind of talk either. But when they say, well, it is physical, and it sounds like they're talking about essence, it's like there's some fundamental nature. They might want to use some more. They might want to use less mystical language. But yeah, when you say stuff like, I don't even know what that means. Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah, I don't even know what it means. So a lot of the contemporary physicalist accounts seem to me to be committed to something where I don't know what the hell they're talking about, and I don't think they know what they're talking about. And
yeah, but there's something there. Okay, there is something there that I'm pointing at, right? We don't know what the hell it is at the bottom, but there is something I'm pointing at, and there is no bottom to these things. The geometry is weird like that. It's not the kind of geometry that has a top and a bottom, a before and an after, a beginning and an end. So we know that, right? So I'm pointing beyond that. So I'm not going to deal with essences or trying to get down to the very bottom turtle. It's turtles all the way down.
Right. See, so if you say it's turtles all the way down, then you're not going to be on board with some contemporary views of physics that say it's not turtles all the way down. Yeah. It's physical stuff. That's what's at the bottom. There's something. Physics isn't just telling us.
But all the turtles are physical.
Physical stuff.
Yeah, but all the turtles are physical. It doesn't matter if it doesn't matter.
It's going to come down to the classic philosophical issue, which is that it's just going to depend on what you mean by physical. And all I'm saying is philosophers are going to want to use terms. Look, you have all these naturalist philosophers and physicalists in philosophy that what they mean by these things is still it's smuggling in Plato or Jesus in the back door in some non-obvious way. And if you pin them down and get clear on what they're trying to say, they're going to appeal to something that I think is going to be unintelligible nonsense about essences and properties and forms or whatever it is that they're going to talk about. And some of them they would deny to the end of their lives that they're committed to this questionable ontology, but they are, and we don't need it. And a lot of them would also, they might deny it, but they're also going to be ruthlessly opposed to pragmatist accounts and you have these options that try to carve out a space within the contemporary analytic space, like a structural realist accounts that are going to say, look, there's no objects, but there are mathematical relations between things. There is structure, and so the universe just is the structure or the relations between things. But I don't even know if I'd want to say that. But that at least is I wouldn't even want to say that, because my problem was with saying that reality like is a certain way. I'm trying to remember. Philip Goff has a way of putting this. Is like Goff will say stuff about how the sciences will give us all these like descriptions of what things are like, but they won't really tell us what the things are, like qualitatively.
Right.
And so the problem with science, like he has this whole narrative of like Galileo and all this stuff. It's a very neat narrative where science is telling us all about these mathematical structures and relations between the things, but it's not telling us about the fundamental nature of the things. That is where I'm going to get off the train with analytic philosophy, is when it wants to tell us about the essences. And I don't care if you call the essence mind or mental substance or physical substance. I don't like the idea of substances underwriting
substances,
reality.
Right? Yeah, and I
reality,
kind of agree
there
with
is a
that.
reality, but I'm not going to say it's made of stuff.
Yeah. When you get really far out in modern physics, okay, you'll find things like this holographic universe, which is basically the idea that there's like a cylinder, and there are like some things on the cylinder that project space and time itself based on their relation to each other. And I came upon that idea when I once tried to do what I call a minimal metaphysical model using the Ruby programming language. And I created a little world where we just had the little dots, little stuffs, right? And we were putting them in relation to each other. And of course, some stuff was further apart than other stuff. Some stuff was moving at a different speed when we looked at the other dimension. And the model became extremely a lot of programming work to do. But it occurred to me that stuff being, in a different spot than other stuff, that could be a property of the stuff things themselves that could be projecting the distance. So in other words, the particles were projecting space-time. There was nothing, and I was just depicting it that way. I was depicting this relation, and then my mind exploded, and that's why I'm bald, because of
I was
doing
about
that
to say,
model.
this is above my pay grade. I'm not quite sure.
Right, minimal metaphysical. I call them minimal metaphysical models, and if you're doing philosophy, it's always a real good idea to think of a minimal metaphysical model and try to program it, because then you will be faced with a lot of questions, like a lot of options, about what you can do. And it's really interesting. Anyway, so, when it comes to physics, I mean, physics is not just about some essences and some stuff. For God's sake, it's so far beyond that right now that, but let's just be honest and call it physics. And physical.
That's what I say.
We got to have a name for
it. But so the thing is, I have stopped calling myself a physicalist in part because of the sorts of objections.
And that really breaks my heart.
Well, I call myself an empiricist and a pragmatist. Okay. And if but then you sound like I don't always. This is a case where I've ceded the terminological ground to the philosophers. I don't always do that. There are places where I try to take that ground back. But keep in mind that this is not my area of specialization, and I can only fight so many fights. So I'm still fighting on the realist, anti-realist front in meta-ethics, because, I don't know if you've seen that stuff, but why do they get to frame their view as realism and my view as anti-realism? I think the stuff they think is real isn't real, and the stuff I think is real, I think is real. So why? Yeah, so I've had people tell me, because you're an anti-realist, you don't even think morality is real. What the hell? What are they talking about? Of course, I think morality is real. I think it's there's like moral judgments and attitudes and institutions and societies and emotions. Of course, I think morality is real. I just don't think it's magical.
Was it you that I heard talking about what real magic is? That real magic is the magic that we see in magic shows, for God's sake. So they kind of turned it on its head, right? Like, was that you talking about real magic shows?
Yes, that was me, but I got it from Dennett, who got it from a magician who they were writing a book on doing like magic tricks.
Real magic.
And people would say, okay, so is it a book on real magic? And it's a little weird. So the idea roughly is this. Actual magic tricks that people actually do, like James Randi or whatever famous magician, Copperfield or something. Those tricks, that illusionism or whatever you want to call it, that's real. People are actually doing those things. They're dropping a ball and hiding it behind you, or slipping a coin behind your ear and making it look like it came from behind your ear. That's real. But like Harry Potter magic, that's not real. But if you ask people, hey, like I'm like doing a trick and I'm like hiding balls or whatever, is that real magic? A lot of people would just go, no. And you'd say, well, what's real magic? They'd be like, Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. That's real magic. So
that's not real.
The stuff wait, does that exist? And the answer is no. So real magic is the stuff that doesn't exist. Like fake magic, like magic that's not real, is what does exist. Now, there's nothing. They're not saying anything stupid or wrong. It's just that what they mean by real, you have to be careful not to equivocate or mix up the two meanings. In one sense of real, by real you mean like by real they mean something like magic that exhibits certain sorts of properties that my concept of real is supposed to pick out in this context in application. Supernatural properties that fall outside the bounds of predictability in science and yada yada. That's real magic in that context. And so magicians, what they're doing on illusionism is not that. Whereas alternatively, by real, you could mean something that you might say is closer to like actual, like it's actually there. So Harry Potter magic, there's no actual Harry Potter magic. There is actual illusionism. So just switch over to the word actual. And I think morality is actual, but I don't think the realist conception of morality actually exists. And so, I've played around with reframing and renaming anti-realism into like moral actualism. Like, hey, we believe that morality actually exists. You believe in like Harry Potter magic notion of morality. So like we're actually, in a certain sense, the realists here. But realists exploit that language all the time because they'll say stuff like, if you're a moral anti-realist, you don't think morality is really real. But I don't want to get on a tangent too much about metaethics. My only point here is I fight that fight in metaethics because I know the topic and I'm familiar with that. It's much harder for me to fight it on metaphysics grounds, in part because I haven't spent, a decade super specializing in that. And also I think there's other people that could fight that fight better than me. And I can only invest so many resources and time and energy in fighting every fight. I mean, I do my best, but so that's why. So I hope that explains why, and it doesn't break your heart too much.
Yeah, the same sentiment caused me to start saying propositional physicalism, because they were talking about real with a capital R. And I was talking about real with a lowercase r. And real with a capital R, I would say, doesn't exist. You're full of shit. It's an emotional thing. So I think we're probably on the same page. It's just that I will cede no ground on being a strict naturalist and a ultimate physicalist and a hard atheist. I cede no ground, and that's sort of a personality thing, not real. Don't worry about it.
So where I don't cede ground is on empiricism. I'm an empiricist, and I can't picture myself giving that one up. But if I did, so a lot of times philosophers will want to push you into, hey, if you want to use that term, you have to embrace our nonsense. So stop using the term or accept our nonsense. And if I had to, I would reject every term and label that there is before I would accept philosophers' nonsense. I'm not going to accept their nonsense.
Real with a capital R is problematic. Yeah.
But they try to do this conquest by terminology so much. And it's because analytic philosophy is so obsessed with language and words and terms. And they want to control what you think by controlling how you speak. And I absolutely hate it. I hate this terminological conquest that they try to stick their flags in our words and say, well, you use the word. And, you'll even have philosophers that will insist that when you speak, you don't mean, like, the meaning of your words isn't what you're trying to say. It's not what you intend.
Right.
The words themselves
it's what they
have meaning. So they'll tell you what you mean by what you say. And if you go, that's not what I mean, they'll go, yes, it is, because I know what the words actually mean. And you're confused. And so when you said the thing, maybe you were trying to say this other thing, but that's irrelevant. What you said actually meant this other thing. And you're wrong about that. So I do encounter that. And it's profoundly bizarre. And yet this is a common view about, like, they treat words as having essences. William James talks about this in his lectures on pragmatism, about how he talks about, like, true names and, like, the old magic, where, like, if I knew your true name, like, you could summon a demon if you know its true name and control it. It's like, your name is Mephistopheles and you will do as I say. They treat it almost as this occult thing where they know the true meaning of the words, and so they gotcha. It's so
the reason for that is that language for us is the way that we carve up the world, right? We can carve the world with words, right? We can put, and that's why consciousness is such a devil, because it has that ineffable quality, right? We can't carve up the words. But language, so it's a short stop from carving up the world and making sense of it to having you control the world de dicto, or with your words, and that's really an interesting thing about humans and language. To us, it is like a god, and that would be an interesting discussion on itself. So Mahayana's mind decided that he would probably agree with me. Just the fact that you call yourself a Mahayanist puts us, makes me like you more. But anyway.
Yeah,
but we had a fight.
Made a lot of good contributions. I did want to say,
we had a fight about.
Leave that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
He and I had a bit of a fight about my grounding of naturalism a while back on your adventures in Super Mario Land, and we kind of wanted to kill each other for a few moments there. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say I like coining phrases and terms, in part because it's fun, in part because I think it's useful. And so, like, I have this term like normative entanglement. So the one I use for this view that you can sort of, our language like dictates the nature of reality, and we have a kind of control over it, that I think a lot of philosophers use. I use this term of, you could say, a term of disparagement. I call it lexomancy, like necromancy, but
lexomancy. Oh, nice.
And it just seems like so much philosophy is magic with words, and it's
lexomancy.
I mean, that is intended as a tool of ridicule, because I think ridicule has a time and place and function. And I think that a lot of philosophy deserves to be ridiculed. And that's probably not a very popular thing. And frankly, I don't really care. I just
that's why I might
use frankly though, which is pretty cringy. So
on my channel, we came up with that classification of philosophy, which we refer to Danny as a philosophy when he talks about dualism and naturalism. And then there's the philosophy who knows he's being a weenie but doesn't care. He just wants to sell you something. And then there's a Velociraptor, which is what we are. We're Velociraptors. We eat Velociweasels and Velociweenies for lunch. You got to have terminology, like man. I've seen Danny's darker, meaner, shittier side, and I still have a problem with him because of what he did to a couple of friends of mine on my channel. And he used this thing where basically he used philosobabble basically to present something that the person did not understand. Okay, like you use some terminology like counterfactuals and cohering something or another and whatever, and then make fun of the person because they didn't understand it. When you were in the midst of an argument, you were trying to present two ideas. And then Danny came in and basically kind of used his education as a hammer. And I did not consider. I know Danny is going to be like when he's Daniel Dennett's age, he is going to be awesome. He's going to be seasoned, and he's going to be different than he is now. Right now, he's just an intelligent weapon without any moral guidance, right? And that's why I have a problem with Danny. He is brilliant, and also very, very, and he can teach something if he takes the time to teach these principles. He is a wonderful teacher, and I've seen him explain things in a way that left me in awe of him. And other than that, I like the kid as a person, but I will give him complete hell for some of his methods. So that's where I'm at with Danny.
I don't want to start. So Danny's a friend of mine. So I don't. I hope we're not causing.
I hope he's a friend of mine. I hope he's a friend of mine. But him and I have this public persona of yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know there was that there. So sorry, Danny. I hope you're not upset with me. So one thing I'll say about Danny is Danny had, I see rapid advances in like, so Danny is on TikTok a lot, arguing with people, and I see a refinement and a polish that is developing.
Oh yeah, he's getting better already. Yeah.
To me, it makes me envious, because I feel like I'm already sort of ossifying and I'm getting locked into the way that I am. And I wish I had started sooner. But the thing is, I don't know. Did you watch my thing? It was last week where I talked about like my origin story, like my whole thing with James Randi and all that stuff.
I haven't watched it yet, and I really want to watch it.
So. Okay, so do you know about how, like, my history, like what I was before I became what I am now?
Didn't you say you were a high school dropout or something? Or
yeah, I did drop out of high school, but I was also
me too. Yeah.
Woo, high school dropout.
I'm a high school dropout. Right.
Yeah. So I dropped out of high school, and then when I started college, at the time I was a Christian. And shortly thereafter, within this 1 or 2 year span, I was a non-Christian. But I used to be into every type of pseudoscience and nonsense you could. I thought crystal magic was crystal skulls were real. I thought I read like Von Daniken, like Chariots of the Gods. I thought aliens were all over the place and there were alien conspiracies. I thought the moon was fake and was like a spaceship that was here to monitor us. Whatever. I don't remember the details of this stuff. It was only 20 years ago. I mean, not that long ago, but it feels like another lifetime. But I believed if it was nonsense, I was all into cryptozoology and Bigfoot. You'll see I use Bigfoot examples a lot still. I believed in all of that stuff. And so the transformation I underwent at that is so radical that people change and advance. And Danny's way ahead of where I was a few years ago already. Yeah. So as far as like argumentative ability, handling arguments in real time, for me, I'm kind of new to it. I've only had my own channel not quite a year now. We're going on 10 months. So and already what I'm finding is getting involved in Discord discussions and debates. That is a very, very different experience than academic work. And I see people in Discord servers that, they tell me, I read philosophy on the side, but I work at, I'm a barista or whatever. And these people will give philosophers a run for their money if they had a live discussion. Philosophers are missing a massive part of their arsenal, which is the ability to think fluidly in real time and to handle arguments, because all of this stuff, they just, everything is channeled through academic publications, these essays that people will sit on for years. Right. And it's not the real-time fluid discourse. And that is something very much missing from contemporary academia, is like this content, like us having a conversation like this. This is not something I could publish and like put on my CV and have like a committee go, wow, good job on making your 53 videos. They don't give a shit about that. They want me to publish something in Nature or Science or whatever, some famous journal. And then that's how you advance your career. And so the whole academia has set up this incentive system that discourages real-time conversation. So that's just an aside. But anyway, I don't know. We're at 2 hour mark. We just passed it. So
I've got a meeting with my psychedelic therapist in about 15 minutes. So we got to wrap her up. Yeah.
So I want to leave the stage to you to say anything that it is that you feel like you didn't get a chance to, or I mean, we could always have another conversation. I thought that for me, this was a lot more chill, a lot more fun than some conversations I had. I'd be happy to do it again.
I have so much that I would like to say and like to talk about and like to get into on in this matter of consciousness and dualism. But it's forthcoming. We'll get to it later. We'll get to more. But it's good having a conversation with you. It's you help me draw things out, and I really, really appreciate that. And
cool. Well, I'm happy to do it again. Now that we've set some preliminaries, we could dig into some of the weeds a bit more.
Maybe we could look at my ribbons and bows idea a little more and see where we could flesh it out. And the whole field of phenomenology is something that needs work, lots of work. We can't just say, oh, consciousness, that thing we all have, we know what it is. Now let's go on and babble about, why physicalism can't explain it. That drives me nuts. Okay. Anyway, nothing more.
All right, Kat, would you mind giving a shout out to your channel, and then I'll say last words, and then we'll go to the outro video.
Okay, Answers in Atheism. We have 627 subscribers. We need 666. Please subscribe. And then when it gets to 666, don't have anybody else subscribe. So that's my appeal. So it's Answers in Atheism.
I did have it screenshotted when I was at 666 myself, so I did achieve that already. So
nice. Yeah.
So
help me out with
everyone,
that.
so go subscribe to Answers in Atheism. And yeah, what else? Anything else?
That's all I got. Yeah, the other thing is I'm on a journey right now, a journey to change myself, change my mind, and to look as far and as deep outside of what my current thinking is, and to be open to anything new. And I've been working very hard on that for about a year. And it's an interesting process to say, I want to change, and I don't care what I change into, to be completely open to a new universe of ideas. So that's about all I have.
Awesome. Well, good luck with that. And so everybody, I just hit 900 subscribers, and I'm trying to get to 1,000 by the end of the year. So please like the video, subscribe. You will see a link to Answers in Atheism in the description. So go check that out. Subscribe over there too. And thanks.
And I'll do my best to send subscribers to you until you get there. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. All right, everybody. Take care.